Blog Talk Radio.
Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust. Broadcasting live presents Two Guys and a Bible with Don Preston and William Bell. Join us each week at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central as we bring you exciting, sound, challenging, and comforting messages regarding the end times. Thank you for tuning in today. Don Preston is the founder. Don is a prolific author, having written and published 19 books, a host of audio and DVD studies, and is a debater and defender of the full preterist view. His websites are BibleProphecy.com, Eschatology.org, and DonKPreston.com. William Bell is the founder of AllThingsFulfilled.com Ministries and has a website bearing the same name, and has authored 3 books, audios, and DVDs. He has published hundreds of articles and recordings. And now, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Two Guys and a Bible broadcast with Don Preston and William Bell. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the All Things Fulfilled. Excuse me, this is the Two Guys and a Bible broadcast. And I've been saying that a lot lately. But nevertheless, we're delighted to have you with us today for Two Guys in the Bible right here on Fulfill Radio. I am William Bell, and with me is Don Preston. Don, how are you doing today?
Great, William. Doing absolutely great. Enjoying this fantastic spring weather that we've been having over here in Ardmore, Oklahoma. I mean, it's just, you could not ask for more beautiful weather if you just, if you went to the catalog and ordered it up. Just couldn't. It's just absolutely fantastic.
Good. It's nice here as well, and enjoying a beautiful day. Had a little rain and cloudy, overcast skies on yesterday, but today it turns out beautiful and bright, most of which I didn't get a chance to see too much because I was in and out. But nevertheless, when you are out there, it's good. So very good. And any news that's happening at this time? Anything that's I know that the Predators Pilgrim Weekend is coming up, so I know you're going to talk about that. What else is there that's going on that is of interest for our listeners?
Well, obviously, we are very excited about our upcoming Predators Pilgrim Weekend, July the 11th through the 13th. We got a great lineup of speakers. Just invited Rod MacArthur to speak for us this year. Again, Rod's been here a couple of different times in the past. He always did a fantastic job, and so I've invited him to come. We've got Kyle Elliott. We have you. So it's going to be a great conference this year. Our theme is how we know we're not living in the last days. And I need to get a couple of sermon titles from you through the email there, Brother Bell, since I'm getting getting the titles from some of the other fellows, then I need to get that from you. But yeah, it's shaping up really well. Very excited about it. And of course, always excited to be able to report some of the correspondence that I'm having from around the world. I got a book order yesterday from the Faroe Islands. Now,
wow.
if you know much about the Faroe Islands, they're just off the coast of Sweden, I think it is. Is it Sweden or, I've forgotten, or Finland or something like that. I apologize for that. And it's a fella been watching the YouTube videos that shows you the power of the internet as we have expressed it over and over and over. I think the Faroe Islands are one of the most sparsely populated places in all the world. And one of the fascinating things about it, Jan jokingly said, we need to go over there and hold a preterist conference. And I said, well, I think the Faroe Islands are about a foot long. They're not very big. I said, they do have an absolutely incredible tradition there that goes back literally hundreds of years. And it's the gathering of the eggs. Pardon me. The gathering of the eggs. Now, hundreds of years ago, there wasn't a whole lot of food on the island. Now, thanks to boat travel, air travel, etc., they have plenty of food, but they've maintained this tradition. And this tradition is, the birds migrate to that island. They make their nest on the vertical face of these cliffs there on the Faroe Island, one of the main Faroe Islands. And in order to get the eggs, they will tie ropes around an individual, and they will drop him off the edge of this bluff. And I'm talking, it's 300 or 400 or 500 feet right straight down to the rocks and to the ocean. And this individual gathers up a little basket full of eggs, and they hoist him back up, and they celebrate the gathering of the eggs. And I thought, you know what? I really, really, really like eggs, but I would much prefer to run to the local 7-Eleven to get a dozen of them. I just don't think I want to participate, and I'm all for history. I'm all for that kind of tradition. I find that kind of thing, just absolutely fascinating as to where those traditions came from. And it's obvious to know where that tradition came from. If they didn't have access to those eggs, they went hungry. So it's a really, really, really big deal down through the centuries. And they admitted on this program that I was watching recently about this tradition, they have no need to do this. There's no longer hunger on the island. There's no longer any true, legitimate need. But the tradition is so well established that they continue. Pardon me, I got a sudden yawn attack. They continue to do that. And that shows you the power of tradition. It really honestly does. So anyway, but this was the second book order that we received from this one individual from the Faroe Islands. He's very complimentary of the YouTube videos and very complimentary of the materials that he has been ordering. And so it's just exciting to know that you're reaching someplace as isolated, as secluded, and as sparsely populated as the Faroe Islands. Now, let's face it, they don't have a whole lot to do on the Faroe Islands. They really don't. They don't have recreational centers that we can go to here in America. They don't have drive-in movies even. And so I suppose internet access has been an incredible and absolutely, incredible blessing to them so that they can actually know what's going on in the wider world. So that's just one of the things that's been going on this week, to be able to reach that far out into the world. I did have some correspondence this week from an individual who swore up and down he did not have a hidden agenda, but the entirety of his post was agenda-driven, caustic, hateful, arrogant, and so I've decided not even to respond to that particular email. It's just, I don't get a lot of that kind of emails anymore, but every once in a while somebody like this feels the necessity to jump up and call me a heretic and to tell me that they're going to set me straight and what have you. And then in their actual email, you discover they don't really understand even the basics of hermeneutic, and they certainly don't understand logic. So sometimes it's just best to let people vent a little bit and continue with what I'm doing. So what's going on in your world?
Well, a lot of work, to say the least. I've been up early mornings for the last couple of days and got to do it again on tomorrow. And matter of fact, I had just gotten in about 30 minutes before the broadcast, just in time to, get it going and everything. So that part is about to wind down. I got a major part of it completed today, and I was really, really excited about that. But as far as the ministry is concerned, I'm like you. I continue to get these messages on a daily basis from people who are listening, and some of them are coming back saying they've watched videos a couple of times just to make sure they got it, and so they appreciate that. But I also, I'm doing this class on Monday nights with the Hebrew Israelites. So we had a kind of interesting title on last night, and we had about 450 people on
wow.
Facebook call last night, and I talked for at least 2 hours, 2.5 hours, and some of the people stayed on pretty much the entire time. So I know Hogan told me he listened for a while, and he went to bed after about an hour and a half. But so, and I saw people on, some of them were a few of my friends and associates that I'd seen on that I'd never seen on anything before, and so they were on and hung out, and so that seems to be doing quite well, and we're still focusing in that area. But we're working in other areas as well. And, as I have the time, which I've had very little of it, recently. But that's kind of what's going on. And we just continue to plug away. But more and more people are learning as a result of our being on these live calls on Facebook. Personally, it doesn't matter to me where it is as long as people are hearing. I'm just comfortable, more comfortable, I guess, and set in my ways with YouTube. But you tend to get that immediate gratification and feedback, so to speak, from Facebook because, there are people live chatting in real time. Some of them are carrying on debates with each other, with one another, and at the same time interacting with me. And it's just a great thing. So we appreciate, everybody who listens and participates in that particular area, and they continue to share the information, so it just continues to grow.
Well, let's face it, anytime you can have over 450 people in a live chat room, you are definitely reaching people because you know that those 450 people are not being quiet in their interactions with their friends and neighbors. They're sharing what's being said. So the number of people that you are able to reach through that live discussion there is obviously having a tremendous impact. So that's just super exciting. It just manifests. This little anti-preterist group has started having a live. I don't know if it's live YouTube or live video on Facebook. I really don't know because, pardon me, I haven't had the time to be on there. My schedule has been more than hectic lately. Thankfully, I don't have to do what you're having to do there with houses and what have you. Which, by the way, I sent you some emails. If you can at all, I need to get some input from you on a couple of emails that I sent you. But nonetheless, even though we both kind of got our own outreach type of thing, and then we have this combined outreach, and we work so closely together on other issues. The growth of covenant eschatology is absolutely astounding. And I mentioned this little group of anti-preterists. What little I've seen of it is they virtually have nobody there.
I was just thinking about that. I said, what an approach. I mean, is this their evangelistic approach to just be anti-preterists? I mean, they're just against something. They're not anything.
Right. Yeah.
I'm saying, wow, what an approach. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, and these guys that are over there on this one Facebook page, they are absolutely caustic. They're hateful. They very often use vile, unchristian language. And I noticed one of the little messages that came across my messenger on my cell phone last night or the night before, perhaps. I'm not sure. Like I said, I've been so busy, I haven't even had time, and quite frankly, I haven't had the time or had the interest to be a part of their group. But I did notice that one of the individuals said, guys, we might ought to be a little more civil. And I'm going, you reckon? What a novel idea to try to carry on a civil conversation. I don't know if they had any. I don't know if they had any preterists on there or not. Again, I just simply don't know. But the very idea that they had to raise the idea as a suggestion now that we might ought to have a civil conversation. It's like, yeah, that's not too bad of an idea. You might ought to practice that.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Oh, it's just, and again, you know those individuals, and I do know that I was invited to join that chat a couple of days ago, I guess when they very first started it. When I saw who was going to be on there, I thought, no, I'm not going to jump into a cesspool of vile language and hateful attitudes when I would most certainly not be given the opportunity to have equal time. There would be constant interruptions. There would be constant insults. So that's not a forum for discussion. That's nothing but a forum to insult, to castigate, to criticize, and to condemn. So there's no benefit to joining that kind of a discussion group. But anyway, I was just struck by the fact that you said you had over 450, and I don't know how many were on there. But I only saw in an extremely quick scan on my cell phone, I only saw like 4 names. So unless they had a whole lot more people there than the names that popped up, wow, that's not very impressive. It sure doesn't compare to 450 people on your live feed, and I've actually given consideration to doing something like that live myself on Facebook, but I just simply have not done it. I just haven't done it. So maybe one of these days I can get around to doing that.
Well, good. It's interesting also in listening to some of the comments. I sort of put a rather interesting title out yesterday, and there's a little bit of clickbait, but it was still an accurate title. People just needed to understand, which I explained once they got on the call, what it was all about. But some of the people who saw that title, they said, wait a minute, doesn't this guy believe that everything has been fulfilled? So I was really impressed with that there are people out there that we don't even know who have heard this message. It's getting out there. And that's really good. They know who we are. They know what we stand for. And one guy even got on and said, look, I went and checked out what your beliefs are. This doesn't sound right.
Say, what are you doing, dude?
Yeah. But it was interesting to see. And I'm really, really grateful. And I know some were, like sharing like crazy last night through the process, and I know the numbers have increased. Today I think it's well over 500 for the number that have listened between last night and today. So that's very good, and it shows that Facebook is a viable medium. As a matter of fact, there was a gentleman on. I've been talking to him about arranging a debate, and he had asked me if I had a partner who might be interested. I wonder who would that be.
I don't know.
At any rate, yeah, they were on with a Zoom deal. I think they had 4 on that night, and so they were discussing, I think, some things that pertain to, I don't know whether it was some salvific issues or whatever, but the conversation just kind of naturally moved toward eschatology. So they said, well, we're getting into eschatology now. And of course, when they said that, I decided to contact the guy and say, hey, you definitely are in eschatology right now, so why not let's have a forum on eschatology and study. And then after we talked, he came back and said, well, why not a debate? I said, well, sure, let's do it. And then he said, well, let's see if we can get another person. He said, do you have anybody else? I guess they wanted to, team up. And I said, sure. But he was on that call last night for sure. He was definitely on.
Well, he may decide he doesn't want to debate. It wouldn't be the first time we've seen something like that.
Absolutely.
But we'll wait to see what happens. Well, we need to move into our discussion for this evening. We're still discussing the Messianic Temple. And there's so many passages in the Old Testament that have to do, some are explicit, some are implicit. And the passage that we want to take a look at tonight is Isaiah chapter 28. Now, it's very important to understand that Isaiah chapter 28 is part of what is known as the little apocalypse. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. Scholars use the term the little apocalypse to speak of Isaiah chapters 24 through 29. Some limit it to Isaiah 24 through 27. Others include chapter 28. I'm personally inclined to believe that it's Isaiah 24 through 29. I just don't see a reason to exclude chapter 28 and 29, especially given the fact that the New Testament writers repeatedly cite from chapter 28 and 29 in their predictions of what was happening in the first century, in the last days, as indications that the time of fulfillment had arrived, and to declare impending judgment on that generation of the Jews. So when we consider those realities, that Isaiah 28 and 29 are part of the little apocalypse, then it becomes incredibly powerful to read the references to Zion. And folks, for those who have never had the opportunity, William, how long did we spend in our study of the topic of Zion? A year and a half, maybe 2 years?
Yeah, it was quite a while. And some very good studies. Yes.
Oh, it was fantastic studies, very enriching. And I would encourage you folks to go back into the archives of Two Guys in the Bible here on Fulfilled Radio and just start listening to those archives on the topic of the study of Zion. Because you see, I think we're safe in saying there's not a single word that carries with it more eschatological as well as soteriological implications, connections. I don't even know what other word to use, but this word, Zion, is absolutely eschatological to the core, to the foundation. Zion would be the capital of the kingdom, to use that terminology. Isaiah chapters 2 through 4. Well, Isaiah chapters 2, in Isaiah 2 through 4, it's the establishment of the Messianic Temple, and it is there to which the nations of the world would travel to be taught of God, to be taught the new covenant. Now, unfortunately, our dispensational friends believe that's a literal geographical gathering to the literal physical city of Jerusalem and Zion, and they posit that in the future. Well, as we will proceed in this study, that simply is not tenable. That is not biblical. That will not stand up to any kind of close examination. But nonetheless, Zion is the capital of the Messianic kingdom. It's the locus of the Messianic temple. Zion is the locus of salvation. Isaiah 46, verse 13. I will put salvation in Zion and my redemption in Jerusalem. Zion is the locus of resurrection. Isaiah chapter 25, verses 6 through 8. On this mountain, which he has just named as Zion, Isaiah 24, 20 and 21. So, on this mountain, the Lord will make a feast, a great feast, a feast of fat things, of wine on the lees. He will make a feast for all nations, and he will remove the curse that is passed on all nations, and the Lord shall destroy death. So here we have on Zion the great messianic banquet, and we have resurrection, and we have, once again, salvation. Everything that there is about salvation, kingdom, resurrection, eschatology is focused on Zion. Now, why is that critical? Well, because in Isaiah 25, we have the prediction of the resurrection and the Messianic banquet in Zion. Then, in Isaiah 27, ought to include chapter 26, but for time's sake, I'll skip over that real quickly. In chapter 27, once again, the Lord would put salvation in Zion, yet at the same time, while he would put salvation in Zion, and while he would gather the righteous remnant to Zion, he would destroy Old Covenant Jerusalem. He would make the altar of the temple, turn it into chalkstone. He would turn the fortified city into a ruin. And the people whom he had created, he would no longer have mercy on her. And so here is a very clear, undeniable prophecy. Number one, of the gathering to Zion for salvation, the time when God would take away Israel's sin, which is quoted by Paul, by the way, in Romans chapter 11, 26 and 27, to take place at the coming of the Lord. Okay? So here we have the time of salvation, but we also have it emphatically posited as the time when Jerusalem and the temple would be utterly destroyed. This is, this two-edged sword is something that far too many people completely overlook, or they deny it, and yet it's right there in the text. So this leads us into chapter 28. Now, we've mentioned the fact that Isaiah 27 through 29 not only has its messianic application, but it has an immediate application as well, and that is to the time of the invasion of Israel by the Assyrians. And that's where we can pick up on Isaiah chapter 28, in which the Lord just criticizes and condemns the leaders of Samaria and Israel for their drunkenness and for their debauchery. And he says they're going to be trampled underfoot because, as he says in verse 2, the Lord has a mighty and a strong one, like a tempest of hail and a destroying storm, like a flood of mighty waters overflowing, who will bring them down to the earth with his hand. The crown of pride, the drunkards of Ephraim, will be trampled underfoot, and the glorious beauty is a fading flower, which is at the head of the verdant valley. Like the first fruit before the summer, which an observer sees, he eats it up while it's still in his hand. So here's the Lord predicting the destruction of the 10 northern tribes, and this is at the hands of the Assyrians. And he is accusing the leaders, the entire people, really, of the leaders of the 10 northern tribes of being drunkards, of being totally consumed with pleasure, of being given over to the flesh. But the Lord says, and this is important language, folks. The Lord has a mighty and a strong one that is like a tempest of fire. He will come and destroy you. Now, that shows us that the Assyrians were simply the instrument in God's hands. Now, back in Isaiah chapter 10, the Lord says that the Assyrian was the rod in his hand. They were the sword in his hand. And conversely, he had put his sword in the Assyrian's hand. And he said they would trample down and destroy. Now, the interesting and the significant thing about it is that the Assyrian had no clue that they were being used by Yahweh. They thought their gods were in control. They thought, as Isaiah chapter 36 very clearly shows, when the Rabshakeh, the ruler and the commander of the armies of the Assyrians, have actually made it all the way to Jerusalem. But they thought it was their gods who had destroyed all of the other kingdoms that they had invaded and destroyed. And so they taunted Hezekiah within the walls of Jerusalem. And they said, why do you think your God, this Yahweh God, will be able to defeat us when no other God of no other nation has been able to stand before us. And yet, again, back to Isaiah chapter 10, the Lord said, they're the rod in my hand. They do not think it so. They do not know it so, but it is so. And this shows us the sovereignty of God, shall we say, behind the scenes, of God allowing other people of other nations to believe that their gods were directing them. Their gods were in control, when in reality it was Yahweh that was in control of the entire world scene. That is an incredible thought, a powerful thought, and one that really, on so many levels, can give us tremendous comfort even to today. William, when the Lord told Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel chapter 2, first of all, he told him that because of his pride, because of his arrogance, he was going to be humbled and brought down. He needed, and this is actually in chapter 4, he needed and he wanted Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians to know that it's the God of heaven who raises up nations and who destroys nations. It wasn't Chemosh. It wasn't Bel, the Babylonian gods. It was Yahweh, the God of heaven and earth. And so, once again, these are incredible thoughts. They're marvelous thoughts. They're comforting thoughts that while we may not always understand, we may not be able to look behind the scenes as clearly as God's revelation was revealed in these ancient texts. By reading these ancient texts, we can nonetheless know it is truly God that raises up nations and destroys nations, all within the purposes of His will. And it is for us as His children to do as Habakkuk, who complained at the seeming unjustness of the world, the unrighteousness of the wicked, and how it could be true that God's people suffered at the hands of people that were more unrighteous than they were. And that's what he said in Habakkuk chapter 1, 12 and 13. Lord, to paraphrase, how is it possible that you will use a nation that is more wicked than we are, that is not as righteous as we are, to punish us? Because your eyes are too holy to look upon evil. Your ears cannot contemplate, cannot listen to unrighteousness. How then can you use these ungodly Babylonians? And the Lord told Habakkuk, number one, I don't have to explain myself to you. And number two, you need to understand. Israel, my people, needs to be punished for their ungodliness. So I will use the Babylonians. Yes, they will treat you cruelly. They'll put fish hooks in your backs and in your lips, and they're going to lead you off. And it's going to be really, really tough. However, rest assured, I will take care of the Babylonians in my own time. And he did. He destroyed the Babylonians. First of all, at the hands of the Assyrians, and then at the hands of the Medes and the Persians, according to Isaiah 13. So, all of this is kind of a lead-in. We have both a historical context of Isaiah chapter 28 of the impending Assyrian captivity of the 10 northern tribes, but then embedded within this great prophecy, as we will see here in a little bit, we will find a great prophecy that extends beyond the days of Hezekiah and the days of the Assyrian invasion, even of the 10 northern tribes. But there are some really fascinating passages here that before we get directly to the Messianic temple prediction, I think that we ought to take a look at. Notice that Yahweh said that the Assyrian was going to come into the land, They were his mighty one. They were his strong one. They were like a tempest of hail and a destroying storm under his control. And he tells Israel that in the time in which they are destroyed, William, we've talked a lot about this, about how there's always a silver lining to the dark cloud. Sometimes there's a dark cloud or a dark lining to a silver cloud. Well, here's a dark cloud because here's the Assyrian, God's mighty destroying army. But notice what he says in verse 5. In that day, in what day? In which the 10 northern tribes will be trampled underfoot, in which the glorious beauty of the 10 northern tribes would fade away and be destroyed. The Lord says, in that day the Lord of hosts will be for a crown of glory and a diadem of beauty to the remnant of his people, for a spirit of justice to him who sits in judgment, and for strength to those who turn back to battle at the gate. William, we've got here this magnificent, this fantastic doctrine of the remnant. You want to offer us a few thoughts on how significant that is for our study, not only of this history, but of the eschatology of the New Testament?
Well, certainly. I think it's important to emphasize because, especially when we are talking about the the judgment that God would bring upon his people, a lot of times we have been unjustly criticized that we are focused on the judgment against Jerusalem and the, as they would often put it, the scattering of the people of Israel. And that they are, and that's one of the reasons why they say there has to be something future, because God is going to regather them. But as I was pointing out last night, even from Zechariah, as you are mentioning, that this remnant is very, very important in just about every Old Testament prophetic book that speaks of the destruction of Israel, like this one is doing here in Isaiah 28. There is also the mention of the remnant who would be saved at the same time. So there is both this coming destruction that's going to wipe away, those who are in rebellion against the Messiah, but at the same time, the remnant is going to be delivered. And I often, will take a springboard from Deuteronomy 28, where you have the blessings and the curses. And a lot of times those who talk about it, they start at verse 15 and then go through the end of the chapter as though that's where the chapter begins. But the first 14 verses of Deuteronomy are all about the blessings that would be poured out. And if you look at any of the captivities, any of the judgments that God brought on his people from a historical point of view, even up to the time of the New Testament, there was always a remnant that was delivered. All the way back to the beginning with Noah, there was a remnant. It was 8 souls, but hey, that's the remnant. And so the world was destroyed, but God found a way to save the righteous. Same thing in the case of Lot. He delivered him from the overthrow and destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. So that's a principle that people should look for and really be focused on when we're talking about this situation of these judgments that are coming upon them and the wrath that God is bringing. But during that same period of time, he's showing his love and his mercy and extending his hand to reach out to those who reach out to him to bring them through these trials. I'm reminded of Zechariah, I believe it's chapter 13, where he talks about 2/3 of the people would die, but 1/3 he was going to bring through the fire. He was going to test them, he was going to refine them, and he was going to bring them through and call them his people, and he would be their God. That's the story of the New Testament. That remnant is always there. It's very, very significant. And anyone who listens to us should always recognize, just like it was in the scriptures in the Old and the New Testament, it's always in our understanding of what God does when he brings judgment.
Oh, absolutely. And to pick up on that just a little bit, I have had countless discussions with people about Romans chapter 11, 25 to 7, where it says, and so all Israel. Well, all means all. All means all. Well, certainly all can mean all, but all can also be very, very limited. And unless Paul, in Romans chapter 11, 25 to 27, unless he completely abandons what he said in Romans chapter 9, what he said in chapter 10, what he said all the way up to verses 26 and 27, unless he completely changes his discussion, unless he completely changes the focus of his discussion, then when Paul says all Israel shall be saved, what he's talking about is the entirety of the remnant. Because in Romans chapter 9, Paul's talking about the salvation of the remnant. Romans chapter 10, Paul talks about the salvation of the remnant. Romans chapter 11, Paul talks about the salvation of the remnant. He does not change the subject in chapter 11, 25 to 27, and say, now look, I know that it's always been just a remnant that's been saved, but wait a minute, now I'm telling you right now, at the coming of the Lord, all Israel, every Israelite of all time is going to be saved. That contradicts not only what he had been saying in chapters 9 and 10, as well as all the verses leading up to 11, 25 to 27, but it violates what William just showed us there all throughout the Old Testament. Throughout the entirety of the Old Testament, God never, ever, ever predicted the salvation of every single Israelite or the salvation of every single individual for that matter. I'm reminded of a parallel passage, somewhat parallel, to Isaiah chapter 28, and that's Amos chapter 5, verses 1 and 2. The virgin daughter of Israel is fallen and shall not rise again. The city that went out 100 shall return 10. The city that was 1,000 shall return 100. A remnant shall return. This is the standard motif. This is the dominant motif throughout the entirety of the Old Testament and New. God never predicted to save the entirety of the entire full number of all Israelites who had ever lived, or even every Israelite that would be alive at the coming of the Lord. He just did not do it unless, to reiterate, unless Paul was changing the entire course of his discussion in Romans chapters 9 through 11. And so that helps us to understand what the all is in Romans 11. It is a qualified all. It is all of the remnant. Because, for instance, back in chapter 9, 28, after discussing the salvation of the remnant, Paul says, a short work will the Lord make upon the earth. And he's talking about bringing the salvation of the remnant to its consummation. And the Lord said it would not be protracted, it would not be delayed. Pardon me. And by the way, the words that he uses there, the Greek words that he uses here, do not allow for protraction. The Lord said, a short work will the Lord make on the earth. He shall cut it short in righteousness. And so this is, without a doubt, the salvation of the remnant, that is. This is, without a doubt, something that was not to take place throughout the entirety of 2,000 years of the Christian age. It is the bringing of Israel's salvation history to its climax, to harvest, let me put it like this, to harvest the old covenant kingdom, bringing it to its climax, so that the new covenant kingdom, the unending kingdom, the never-to-be-destroyed kingdom of Messiah, could be fully established. Would bring the old covenant kingdom to its end, bring in the full harvest of the remnant of that old covenant kingdom, and establish the everlasting, unending kingdom that has no, quote, end of the age harvest, for the simple reason there is no end of this age. And so, pardon me, it was important for us to take this little sidebar here to take a look at this concept that here is God promising the destruction of the 10 northern tribes. He said, I've got my mighty one, I've got my strong one. He's like a hailstorm and a powerful destroying wind under my control, and he's going to destroy it. But in that day, the Lord will be seen to be glorious. He will be a crown of glory, a diadem of beauty to the remnant of Israel. Folks, there's your silver lining to this dark cloud. Now, before we get to our messianic passage, there are a couple of verses here that need our attention. There's something going on here that is so commonly overlooked. And I know that William has been doing some really, really good research on this. He shared some of it with me not long ago. I'm going to skip down to the verse. I'm going to skip over verse 11 and 12. Okay? But I want to get to verse 13 because this verse is so taken out of context. The Lord says, the word of the Lord was to them, that is, Israel, the rebellious tribes, precept upon precept, precept upon precept, line upon line, line upon line. Here a little, there a little, that they may go and fall backward and be broken and snared and caught. William, I know that in your discussions with the black Israelites, they take a position on this, that, well, this has to do with continuing revelation. Therefore, continuing revelation in our day says that the black Israelite movement, for instance, is of God and what have you. And, by the way, they're not the only ones to appeal to this verse as continuing revelation, latter-day revelation that says, well, you know, yes, God reveals such and such in the Scriptures, but now he has added line upon line, precept upon precept, and he has revealed this additional revelation to me. Pardon me. But is that even close to what this verse is saying?
No, it's not. It's rather interesting to talk about this verse because it is brought up almost, just every single time they speak and used as a hermeneutic for the most part, which means that they can just pull any verse that they want. And if you say something and you give them the scripture for it, if they don't agree with it, then they will come back with a verse, whether it applies to the context or not. But their justification for the use of that text is line upon line, precept upon precept. And so they use it. It's almost like some sort of magical saying that they use that's going to just take all the error away from and refute all the false arguments that are out there. But it's used in that particular way. So we were studying it one night, and the question came up, what is this? And I've never really delved into the verse to find out exactly what it was saying. And so we pulled it up and looked up the word, and it said a commandment. And I thought, I need to look into this a little bit more. And so I did. And I did a study on it, and I presented that live on Facebook. And it was like revolutionary. I mean, there were 3 words, and I don't remember them because they're in Hebrew. As a matter of fact, we're having a Hebrew class on the 13th of April. We've got a guy coming in. And we actually consulted with that guy who teaches Hebrew. But this was after I had done the research myself. And so after doing the research and looking at all of the 3 main words in the text, they all pointed to some type of command or order that was given and had to be followed. And I listed, several examples of that in that particular research. Well, we had this guy on, and we put him on YouTube. We had a live class with him, who is a very proficient in the study of Hebrew, and he went through it and basically confirmed everything that I said. It was just absolutely amazing, and so they have pretty much toned down their use of this particular term, but it definitely was a revelation. I mean, I remember, I think I saw a comment from you on Facebook where apparently some people were using it either in the sense of this ongoing revelation or as a hermeneutic. And I remember your statement. You said, look, if it's a command, it's not a hermeneutic. And that's what it was. I don't know if you want me to go into what he was actually saying to them regarding this verse.
Well, share with us, because it's very, very important to understand, because the point that you're making there, if it's a command, it's not a hermeneutic. I mean, that's just all there is to it.
Right.
And that's powerful. So go ahead.
Yeah. Well, anyway, here they are, rebellious, as you pointed out. They're refusing to obey the Lord, etc. And so he asked them, whom will he teach knowledge? And whom will he make to understand the message? Those just weaned from milk, those just drawn from the breast. For precept must be upon precept, and line upon line upon line, here a little and there a little. And so what you have here is God telling them, and he's sort of mocking them in the process, because they were saying things like this. And so he mocks them to tell them, look, I can't even teach you. It's almost like the text in Hebrews 5, where he says, when for the time you ought to be teachers, you have need to be taught again, and are like babes and not those who can handle strong milk. So what he's saying, okay, I'm going to have to teach you a little at a time, like one command, like you teach a baby. You cannot teach them like a concept and an idea or a series of thoughts, and all woven together in terms of some cohesive argument and presentation. You have to teach them one little thing at a time and let them get that, and then teach them another one thing at a time and let them get that. And so, in other words, he was saying to them, I'm going to teach you this one command. And, there were three different words in that, but, give them this one thing to do. And even then, they were not able to do it, and were going to stumble and fall as a result, and the judgment, of course, would come upon them because they were refusing to accept his word. So that's basically the gist of what I understand in terms of, what he's saying in the text.
Well, and it is extremely powerful. The notes that you sent to me demonstrating linguistically from the Hebrew that these words indicate commands, again, not hermeneutic, not principles, but commands of God. It just changes the way that we have to look at the text.
Yes.
Pardon me. And so when people do try to go here and they try to claim this as a source for their authority to add to the Word of God because God's giving them additional revelation, sorry, that just absolutely does not work. But it does show, and what you have pointed out there in the very brief linguistic analysis is how immature those ancient Israelites were, how hardened their hearts were. It may not be so much immaturity, spiritual immaturity, as it was carnality. That because of their carnality, Jesus said once in John chapter 8, why is it that you do not understand the words which I speak to you? And the reason that he said they did not understand was because they were from below, he was from above. Their hearts were set on earthly, material, physical realities, and he was speaking to them about spiritual things. And, Paul said, the things of God are foolishness to the natural man. The natural man cannot receive the things of God because they are foolishness to him. 1 Corinthians chapter 2, 6 and following. And that's the way it is. When you have somebody, and the context here shows us that that's exactly their mindset. When you have people that are so given over to their lifestyle that they're drunkenness, that their whole world is given over to to the booze, so to speak, and to everything associated with that life of drunkenness. Trying to talk to them about spiritual things, about things of God, and about holiness and righteousness and purity, it's like the old saying, it's like water off the proverbial duck's back. Number one, they don't want to hear it. I was trying to talk to somebody here in Ardmore just not long ago, and they just told me, they said, look, I'm not interested. And I said, so you're not a believer of any kind? They said, I said, you're not interested in any kind of spirituality? They said, no, I have no interest in it. I don't feel any need for it. And it's like, well, okay. Some people harden their hearts that they are so focused on the physical and satisfying their lives, their personal, physical, fleshly desires, and their selfishness, they have no intentions, desire, or will to listen to spiritual things. And again, as you pointed out so well a moment ago, that's what's going on in Isaiah. I mean, when you got people who live for the weekend, I mean, how many times do we see on TV commercials, one beer commercial after another? Can't wait for the weekend, living for the weekend. And that's what their whole life is about. You live for the weekend. Right. Go ahead.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, you brought up that idea of carnal, and it made me think of 1 Corinthians 3, when Paul even said, I could not speak to you as into spiritual, but as into carnal, even as babes in Christ. So here's another example of where he's saying, I got to spoon feed you. I've got to give you a little bit at a time because you can't digest the mature things of God, because your life is carnal. You're filled with envy and strife and division, etc., and acting as mere men, as opposed to those who are of God, those who are spiritual, those who are mature. So, and that is exactly what's going on in this particular chapter. I mean, man, when you think of the priest, and he's talking about their all the tables are full of vomit and filth, etc. No place is clean. They're erring through intoxicating drink, etc. I mean, that is just total disregard for the holy things of God.
Yeah, and I couldn't help but think, and of course it takes place at a later period of time, but in Ezekiel chapter 8, we are told of how the priest would stand at the door of the temple and look away from the temple to the east as they engaged in the worship of Tammuz and the Asherah. And part of what that involved, folks, and think about this. I want you to think about this. How debauched, how debased is this? Because the gods and goddesses of Tammuz and Asherah involved, in addition to sexual immorality, involved the worshiping of mice. Now, I don't personally know how you'd ever get women to worship a mouse. I can assure you, about the first time you turned a mouse loose in the temple of Tammuz, my wife would have been running for the hills. Not happening. But that shows you how debased the ancient Israelites, as well as the Judeans, had become, because the 10 northern tribes were worshiping the same gods, the Asherah, Ashtaroth, Molech, and there's a whole pantheon of gods and goddesses, and those gods and goddesses were focused on alcohol and sex and fertility, with worshiping trees, worshiping rocks, worshiping mice, worshiping the entire creation. Now, again, I don't, my mind cannot even wrap around the concept of what is there about mice that would ever cause anyone to even remotely conceive of worshiping mice. But they did. And so this is absolutely astounding. And so this is why God said, I can't even teach you like I need to. I have to give you one command, one basic command, followed by another basic command for you to even get the message. And he said, guess what? Judgment is coming. That's where we will pick up next week, because we're already out of time. But we've been trying to set the context for understanding. And here's what you need to know before next week. In the Assyrian invasion of Israel under Sennacherib, the temple was not destroyed. The Jerusalem temple was not destroyed. Jerusalem was delivered. Therefore, the prophecy that we will examine next week, the prophecy of a foundation stone for a temple, looks beyond the Assyrian captivity and looks to the Messianic temple. So be looking forward to that. William, as always, it's been great to be with you again. If you would, please be sure to read those emails I sent you. I'd like to get your input on some things and some answers. So, with that said, folks, good night and God bless.
Thank you for joining the Two Guys in a Bible radio broadcast. On behalf of Dunn Preston and myself, we'd like to say, have a very pleasant day, and may God bless. Until next time, we'll see you on Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust.